This is Alejandro Ibrahim and Real Tchakirides interviewing Andre Vann for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. The time is 3:36 on July 11th, 2024. This interview is being recorded at North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina. So, happy to have you, Professor Vann. My first question is, could you please state your full name and relationship to the WNCU radio station?
My name is Andre Vann. I'm the coordinator of University Archives and instructor of public history here at North Carolina Central University. And my relationship to the radio station is that, for one, I am a large consumer of much of the radio. And then the other part is that I've been a participant in many programs associated with WNCU 90.7. And so I'm glad to participate here.
Thank you. So, could you please tell me when and where you are from and about the people who raised you?
I'm originally from Henderson, North Carolina, which is about 35 miles north of here. And my parents, Martha and Cecil Vann, were owners of a local grocery store, Vann's Grocery and Fish Market, one location, one near you, as we like to say. And they were very community and civic-minded individuals. We come from a community that was founded by my maternal great-great-grandmother, Rebecca Hawkins. We've been on the land since the 1880s. And so it was from that kind of cocoon, from that kind of world that I come from, that I learned a lot about people working together, seeing people overcoming challenges, but also understanding a community that works to lift itself up. And so that's the community, that's the world I kind of come from. I'm the 8th of 9, by the way, if I did not say as well.
Okay.
I want to follow up real quick. You mentioned land ownership. Can you just speak briefly to the significance of black land ownership in a place like North Carolina and why it's so significant?
Mm-hmm. It's significant in the sense that the question of land ownership among African Americans is significant. I was interviewed about this once, and it very much evolves around this question of what are the things that tied African Americans to the state of North Carolina post-emancipation. People had choices. A portion of my family migrated away, but then my great-grandfather and a few of his other brothers, out of 11 sisters and brothers, 5 or 6 of them decided to stay in the state while the others migrated away in the 1890s, and which made the newspaper, by the way, in my little hometown. And so what kept them here? And it was a question of land that kept them here. And so my great-great-grandmother, Rebecca, was a midwife. She was the daughter of the enslaver, Judge John D. Hawkins. And so, but one thing he was instrumental in doing was making sure that she had some land after his death. And so from that land, 10 little acres came over 40 different lots. And so she was known to be quite adept at money, but illiterate when it came to basic writing. But one thing about her, though, she had a very good lawyer, because she made sure that she gave each of her children, there were 11 in total that remained African American. There were 10 who were of mixed ancestry and kind of disappeared and never came back. But she made sure that each one of them got a lot in her section of property. And she also wrote in there through her lawyer that they could never sell it. And so that to me was aspirational on Rebecca Hawkins' part, because what she was saying to not just her children, but to their descendants alike, that home is always placed and land has importance, and that has not always been the same here in the state of North Carolina, where people have been sharecroppers, some forced off their land, but we're glad to say the deed that I own to the 2 lots I have of hers that has fallen under me dates back to 1883. And so we have not sold. We've been asked to sell. We will not sell because it's selling off our heritage. And so that land question is an important question, because it's what we call rootedness. And land, as the Africans see it, is very much this question of rootedness. What keeps us here? And it's always the idea and the ability to be able to kind of always go back to home and go back and walk the land in which your ancestors once walked on. And that means something to me.
If I'm correct, are you also related to Charlotte Hawkins Brown, who started the Charlotte Hawkins Brown Institute in North Carolina?
One and the same. Yes,
Wow.
yes, I am.
Okay.
Dr. Charlotte Hawkins Brown founded in 1902 the nation's first and the oldest black preparatory school in the United States of America. She too was born on the same land as I. on today Hawkins Drive in Henderson, North Carolina. We were born one street apart. She was born on Hawkins Drive. I was born on Skeens Avenue, at home, by the way. And so that has been a very inspirational point for us to have someone who has dedicated education for over 50 years running Palmer Memorial Institute and understanding that education also, much like land, is key, is one of the anchors to the salvation and really the uplift of African Americans. And that's been an important inherent truth in all of us.
Okay. What did your parents or caretakers do for work?
Yeah, my parents, again, first of all, my father, he had about 2 jobs besides being a community leader. One was he worked for the AFL-CIO, right? Worked among the tobacco workers, and so he ran a union for over 25 years. And then he ran a grocery store, Vann's Grocery, at the same time. And so it was kind of interesting to kind of see him kind of at work, because our grocery store, and to many, what many just saw as a grocery store, was really like a community center almost, in a sense, that or outpost, in which anything that happened and occurred came through our little store. Anything involving in the community, anything that was seen as a perceived threat to the community. My father was a precinct captain for over 20-some years as well. And so anybody in politics running for office had to come to South Henderson number 2, of which he was a precinct captain, which was inspiration for me, because I ran my precinct for 10 years. So he did 20, I did 10. And so it was healthy for me to see, African-American leadership, people coming together to solve their own problems and issues before they went outside of the community. And so from that role, he was not just a businessman, a labor organizer, but also a community figure. And my mother worked right along there with him, helping to raise the family. Our store was right beside our home. And so that was, unique within itself as well, that we didn't have too far to go. And so therefore, in the evening time, whether it was late at night or early in the morning sometimes, anything that went on, anything was going on, came out and was discussed in that neighborhood store. And I have many fond memories of many great personalities came through.
Is that where your sense of community comes from? Is the store that nexus, or is it part of family? And I'm kind of trying to understand how a sense of place in that section of North Carolina helps to foster a sense of community, of solidarity, of a shared ethic. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I will, certainly. I think you are on to a pretty interesting point, that much of who I am today is as a result of what I saw and what I experienced, whether being young or as I came of age. And the idea of understanding, again, what few choices, sort of that African Americans have, right? Could they, again, be a portion of those that migrated away, be a portion of those that chose to stay and chose to live within the confines of segregation, which is pretty much my family's place. And they created their own institutions, right? And that was helpful for me to see that, again, they were independent. And they only had to go out when there were certain things they could not grow, certain things they could not buy in our store. My great uncle lived right up the street, and he had a pool hall / community grocery store as well. So we had the 2 community grocery stores in our neighborhood. They invited in. They had a few churches there, and most of the family. So I don't know if many people understand what it means to live in a neighborhood where you see no one but your relatives. And my grandmother lived up the street. My maternal grandmother lived up the street. My paternal grandmother lived a block away. My mother's, all her aunts and uncles, cousins, all who had not migrated away, lived within the confines of, just imagine, about 3 blocks, right? And that was important to see also about what community is, what family is, what are those deeper meanings. Lots of family lore and history that was passed on to me. I think I am in what I'm doing today because my grandfather's 2 first cousins, who we call aunts, were actually, I found in history, were actually his first cousins, who were born in like the 1890s. And these ladies lived until like 1983, 1985. And they would, because they didn't have children, but I was like the next youngest one, and I don't know what they saw in me, but they would call me always to the house. They would just sit down. Everybody else out having a good time playing, and I couldn't be outside with my friends. And I was a fool because I thought I was missing something because they were outside having a good time, and I'm inside or sitting on the front porch with them, and where they're regaling to me and telling me these stories about family and about community and where from whence we had come. And then they started giving me photographs. They started giving me pictures and little nuggets. And I'm going to my mother. I was like, well, I wonder why they're giving. She said, well, obviously they must think that you're the one. And so it is this idea that sometimes elders know best. They know who needs to hear these stories. Because my other cousins, and including those that would come down in the summer to stay with us, my playmates, as we always call each other, they didn't experience that. And so nowadays they'll call me and they'll ask me about a lot of that family history. And so I know that didn't get near your question, but I hope it helps you to understand. Not many people are blessed enough to live among your people generationally, right, on land that belongs to you, where you don't have to check in with anybody. You don't have to, go anywhere else to find out. It is yours. And if you sell your inheritance, as we told our relatives up north, if you sell your inheritance, that's on you. But don't come back to us later asking for that land back, because you won't get it back.
Yeah, no, you're getting at what I wanted to ask you, but you actually answered it. So I'm thinking, why is historical memory important? But what I really want to know is, and my follow-up would have been, why is historical memory and storytelling powerful politically? And when I say politically, I'm not talking about electoral politics. I mean developing power. Mm-hmm. So what is the power of storytelling?
The power of storytelling is, I think, the most impactful thing that could occur in any young man or young woman's life. To have the ability to have someone transmit the historical past to you, a past that you may not have experienced, but through their storytelling, through their sharing of this history, you get to embrace it and take it in and inculcate it, and then go out and almost, as I always like to do, I follow their example. And so the stories that they shared about how our people learned to look to each other. If I didn't mention this, my mother's grandfather, Thomas Hawkins, he was a brick mason, right? And so there I go discovering more about him. My mother lived among them, of course. And so she would always tell me about it. So I got curious about it. So let me go out there and take a look. And so there I go in the Henderson Daily Dispatch and found his obituary there, right? And the obituary says, Tom Hawkins from South Henderson, North Carolina, brick mason, dies. And then it told a story that he helped to brick in most of the buildings in downtown Henderson. That was important for me because I've always been engaged with our history, engaged with our heritage. And what that told me was that he didn't have to work for anyone else because he created his own crews. So whoever worked with him in any brickmaking project, he was his own boss. And that was a level of independence that was different from others. And then all his brothers who learned the same. And so my great uncle also in Weldon, North Carolina, he did most of the brick working there because of what he saw in Henderson. So that was important for me to understanding, how history and memory is important. But also sometimes it's also important and equally to know of those things that we choose not to remember. And that does not get talked about enough. How some of the relatives, they would share some of the historical parts, and sometimes they would kind of tiptoe around the painful parts of family history. And painful meaning the migrations, right? To come from a huge clan and then to know that by the 1940s and 50s, half of the family had migrated away to New York City. If you go to Cambridge, Mass, so they were so important to them that they congregated together. And usually they lived not far from each other. In Harlem, New York. You go to Mount Vernon, New York, collection there. Philadelphia, collection there. But you go to Cambridge, Mass, in Boston, they were all over that place. Lived among themselves. Founded a church, Union Baptist Church near Harvard Square. And I've been there to visit when I interned at the Kennedy Library in Boston. And that told me a lot, that even when they migrated away, those stories, travel with them. And that's what's important. And that memory traveled with them. So when I got to some of 94 and some of 95, and there I was in Cambridge, and talking to these relatives whom I had never met a day of my life. I'd heard about them. These are my mother's family, who had, among that group that migrated away in the 1890s. And they're telling some of the same stories that they had heard their relatives who had migrated away share, and that was helpful for me. And then they gave me like a huge swath of historical content to bring back, and that helped to fill in some of what we call the lost pages of history. Because one doesn't know about oneself. How can, and as I tell students here, if you don't know about yourself, and Alejandro will tell you, if you do not know about yourself, how can you tell anyone else about who they are? Right, and so you have to be self-assured, and that's one thing about history and memory. That's what it has done for me. It has made me self-aware and self-assured of my history, my heritage, and my culture, and I have not forgotten it. And I pass that on to other relatives, but also, more importantly, pass it on to the students to be aware of their history and be aware of their past. And I kind of build it into my syllabus that I teach in research and methods as well, helping them to see that you have to be curious about yourself and answer those questions. Right.
So this project values radio as a powerful medium of communication and storytelling. Was the radio ever on in your house when you were growing up?
The radio was always on when I was growing up. My father's very good friend was a radio announcer, Mr. Joe Wortham. And Joe Wortham, we had several local stations there. And my cousin, Margaret Ellis, she was on the Board of Education in Henderson. She did the Sunday show. So Mr. Joe Wortham, who was we call him our black radio announcer. So if he wasn't doing his part, my cousin Margaret Ellis was. And so usually on Sunday was our big time. So I just remember Sunday morning as we were getting ready to go to Sunday school or go to church, that my mother would always, as she was preparing the meal for us, always would have a gospel station on. And Mr. Joe Wortham or Miss Ellis, they would be right there. And so before we get to church, we've already heard about half the news about what's going on in our community, because that's when they used to announce and talk about what was going on in our local African American community. Sometimes that was the only square, the only place where they can hear that information and hear that news transmitted. Somebody died. You hear people talking about, we regret to report such and such has passed, and so that was helpful for the entire, I think, not just for me, but for the entire African American community to know that you had a place where you can go. It may not have been every day, but you at least knew on Sunday you were going to get your portion of gospel music to help you go on another day, but also you're going to find out what was going on in news related in the community. And so linking that back to WNCU 90.7, it very much is and mirrors that, because on Sunday I turn my station on when I get up, right? Whether I'm upstairs or downstairs, whether I move around or people visiting, you will hear 90.7 on Sunday at work, and then in the afternoon. By the evening, Attorney Irv Joyner and his show, The Legal Eagle Review, of which I've been a nice person and participant invited there by them. That's important. And Mr. Fulbright, Ed Fulbright, he has a show dealing with business and finance. So a few times he invited me in as well to kind of share about Black Wall Street and the Haiti community and understand how all that works as well. So all in all, I can say those experiences of growing up in Henderson and hearing these black figures sharing with me the news that was going on. And this was a white station, by the way, that was smart enough to know that my hometown had always been over 50% black, always. Since the 1880s, over 50% black.
So, what specific show do you remember you would personally want to listen to a lot? Like, what specific show growing up?
You mean in Henderson or here?
Henderson, but you can also segue to here too if you would like to.
Yeah. I think, like I said, well, for us, growing up young, the gospel stuff was fine. You're right, but I do remember. I think the first time Foxy 107. It's another news. When Fox 107, which is like the news station, for those unaware, hip hop did come to the South. For those unaware, right? And I came of age when hip hop was kind of coming along, and so for us, outside of our relatives who would come home for the summer, and our uncle would turn over his little pool hall and kind of little mini grocery store and let us have our parties there, invite folk from other communities in, where we got to hear what rap music was all about. And so the irony was that here it was, we had our own flavor and taste of hip hop and culture taking place, because people were coming down sharing that music, and we were like, well, what is that? And but then it found a root it took root here, and so then you have a station like Foxy 107. I remember when it first came online on the radio, because we were in the car with some of my relatives, and they said, "Oh, we want to introduce a new station comes online," and voila, and that station ends up kind of critically linking us with a world deeper than where we live. When you come from a rural area, and where you don't have like big city things like they have here. But we did have access to the radio. You did have access to hearing a world outside of our world. So that was important for me. So for me, hearing Foxy is fine. Like I said, the Sunday with the gospel piece, I think gospel music, that is something I love, because my mother's family and my family, we're very musical people. We love music. And music is an inspiration. It's like an anchor for us. When all the world is going to HELL in the basket, at least when it comes to some form of gospel music, it just kind of helps for me. It kind of helps center you and center your world and calm you down from that day. And then all important, as I said, it goes back to my mother. I would hear her singing these very songs because her family is very musical. Right, these black folk had pianos in their home. Most folk had pianos in their home, and so music was always important to us, and the radio sometimes was that very important link in terms of that.
So as a young person, as you're making your way through high school, was it always clear that history and the humanities was going to be a path for you, or was there ever a struggle in thinking about what you wanted to pursue as a learner? And I want you to kind of lead the answer to this question into your decision to eventually attend North Carolina Central.
Mm-hmm. Well, I must say, as I always say, that I think the life that I have and the life that I live and the life that I enjoy was almost predetermined, almost from birth, from having these elders of our family and our community, really kind of sharing the importance in history and heritage. But also, I think there's an old-fashioned term called filio-pietistic, to have a love or reverence for one's people. I was lucky that I came of age of a people who believed that merely because you were segregated, merely because the external world offered a segregated society, did not mean that your mind had to be there. And that was helpful for me to see a rural people from a little small community, but that was over 50% black, who never gave up on themselves. And that was helpful for me to know that I too had an obligation. And so then the important question that arose was, what does one do with oneself? And for me, I knew that education was a part of salvation, because I'd already seen folk who had gone before me. My mother's family, when early high school, dating back to the early 1900s, first one for black folk in our town. My mother's kinfolk from as early as 1890s were among the early graduates of that school. We had Kittrell College in the back end of our town, where our relatives from Kittrell. So we saw examples of other relatives that had already started in education. Before I came to school, 3 of my brothers had already received degrees. All 3 of them in business, by the way. None of them wanted to come back home and practice business, but they all had degrees in business. My mother's aunts and uncles, parents, they owned every little store that you can think about. They were dentists, doctors, and teachers, and that's the world I saw, and that world was helpful for me, because it said to me that they lived outside of sometimes the norm, but with that came privilege, and the question was, when I saw them with that level of privilege, what did they do with their privilege, right? Did they keep it to themselves, or did they share with others? And that is the important lesson that I received, that your education is not for yourself. It is for the uplift of your people. And I taught that, I preached that, because I saw that. And that's something that I inspire and tell other students here as well, that, for whom is your education? It is not for you. It is for you advancing the next generation and others. And so that's what a degree coming here at North Carolina Central University, coming from Henderson, North Carolina, which, by the way, wasn't given that I would come here. My mother almost wanted me to go to Winston, and my father wanted me to stay and run the grocery store. And I told him, I said, well, if I stayed and ran the grocery store, there'd be a chain of grocery stores by now, right? Because that's just how I'm confident about that, right? But I chose education and this institution as a place because my mother's uncle came here in 1933 and graduated, and I ended up 60 years later graduating class of '93, right? That was important. But all in between there were all these cousins, relatives, aunts, and uncles that had already been here. And so that sort of helped pave the way for me. And I did it for the next generation. So my nephews and nieces that came here, great nephew just graduated, fifth generation, that has been a place that has centered me. But the most important connection as well is getting back to the founder of this great institution, Dr. James E. Shepard, founded this school in 1910. His granddaughter, by the way, lived in my hometown, Miss Carolyn Smith Green, who happened to marry my family doctor. And what are the chances of that, right? And so that was important to understand, these connections and relationships that you have with people. So anyway, I know I'm talking on, but go right.
No, just a quick follow-up on the community aspect. And again, it's a quick follow-up, doesn't have to be in depth, but you said your family had a grocery store. Is that grocery store still existing? And also, what sense of economic empowerment did you see manifest from that to you specifically?
Yeah. Well, it survived about 40 years, and then right a little bit after I left to come to school, my parents, I think, just decided, hey, it's probably time to retire. Because again, I didn't have a degree in business. My three brothers had degrees in business, but they weren't inclined to kind of come back home, and yet still, the burden was there upon me. With my father, he wanted me. He's like, I think you should stay. And my mother said, no, I think he needs to go to school. So she won out. I do somewhat regret that because I told folk, I said, the greatest headache I ever had in my life was, where you kind of caught in that, right? Do you stay or do you go, right? But my mother had determined. She said, well, I think, he should have the same opportunity as others have, and he should go, and we're going to figure this out. And so figuring this out meant that one of my sisters who got married ended up running it for a while. But when the leaders sometimes step away from that business, the synergy and energy sometimes is not there, right? And that was a part of it. But all in all, I think for me, and I'll make it quick, the commitment of seeing what I saw and how it impacted us, it helped get us raised not only 9 children. I told folks we had 3 other first cousins who came to live with us at some point in time, all in between it. So I'm on the younger end of the 9 children. So the older ones were getting married and moving out and traveling, and then we opened our doors. And so I told folks, I don't know how they could have done it. I don't know how you could have raised 9 children. 3 first cousins coming through. When my grandmother got sick, our family doctor, Dr. Green, I mentioned about, had just opened up a retirement center called Pinecrest, right? And so she stayed with us. So imagine, in a home, 3 generations. Sometimes if a nephew, niece want to come. So imagine a home where 4 generations are at work, and all the great conversation we had, all the visitors coming through, and I came from a very healthy world, right? Because that's what I saw, people coming together. Family coming together.
Did you end up studying history in college as an undergrad?
Oh, I'm sorry if I did not say that in the beginning. I should have. Yes. U.S. history, bachelor's 1993, master's.
Oh, yeah. So my question is, was there a sense of responsibility knowing you were going to pursue history in relation to what might have been expected by family to support the farm or to support the business or to support the community, something that was lucrative, something like business? Was there any struggle, tension within your own mind and a sense of obligation to the community, or did you see the work that you knew you would end up be doing, this memory work, right, this historical work, as something that would contribute in a different way and would contribute to a different sense of empowerment? I
think I always knew again what I would do because of what I had been trained and what I had been taught by this uneducated group of people who were as educated as anybody else with a PhD, because they share the importance of storytelling, the importance of knowing oneself, and that then did create an obligation, I think, in my mind that I had an obligation to transmit the same as I had seen. right? And then understanding that, again, I was 25 years old when I started teaching here. I was just got my master's degree, and there I was teaching with my professors. I don't know how many folks can say that. And I was lucky because they had taught me, and I learned from them in history by going out, and we would travel the country, all these associations for study of African American life and history, Organization of American Historians. If that was a conference, they would always find a way for me to go and deliver my paper and get serious feedback from these professors with PhDs who probably knew more than I did. And so that was the healthy and encouraging part of that you had a chance to see a world outside of normal academia, right? And to see it young, and that's what I like about it. Again, when you're in your 20s and here you are with your former professors, and here you are engaged in history and heritage, and most importantly, memory. That's important, right? Because and for those who are unaware, this question of memory, it is not given to all. It is for me, I felt it was a heritage, but it was also a gift. Right. Anytime you can recall, what happened like yesterday in my family or somebody else's history over 100, 150 some years ago, that is not by accident. That is, a gift, and you have to appreciate that. And that's how I see it. I don't take anything for granted. I do nowadays scribble and write down as much as I can, but I also publish a few little small books that kind of dealt with community histories and memories in Vance County, here in Durham, and other places as well. And so that has helped me.
Just carrying it back to radio for a second, just what made the WNCU radio station an ideal soundtrack as you're pursuing your academic work here on this campus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think it's one of the most important facets, while others might get caught up in the music side. I really enjoyed, as I did back home, we had a guy back home who was like a radio announcer, right? Mr. Bob Harrison. He told everything in the neighborhood, right? So here I was glad that we would hear community conversations that were taking place on the radio that talked about some of the public issues and public matters of the day. And that is a difference, right? I got to interview several interesting individuals who had come through the radio station to kind of better get, a look at their lives and sharing it over the radio. And that was empowering, I think, for me, to kind of see that, you too can learn a little something. And sometimes they give you these tutorials, say, hey, well, you have a series of questions. I always kept questions, right? And because I'm always curious. You always asking other questions to get better answers, right? And so I think that's, for me, what WNCU 90.7 has been, a great opportunity. I think a learning institute, right? Not just for me, but also they're close to mass communications there as well, and a training ground, I think. And I remember, I do not ever remember a time where I did not see someone who was enrolled at North Carolina University, not in their internship or working and seeing, but it is always, for me, as you can tell, I love conversations, right? Like I call it the front porch edition, right? Where you get a chance to kind of sit back and hear people talk about their experiences and their lives, and you will find that there's a whole world of people who are waiting and hungry to hear these stories, and especially stories about the African American life that had been left to the dust, that many people had not talked about, but yet people are hungry for on today.
What shows did you come on as a guest when you graduated, when you came on WNCU as a professor? What shows did you?
Yeah, well, some community affairs. Miss Edith Thorpe was good, finding a way to kind of get me over, to kind of talk about things, and sort of, sharing, again, if there was a major event, like say Thurgood Marshall, say maybe if he died, or if other figures, they say, hey, well, we want to hear a community aspect, university aspect. Give us your best. Like I said, the League Eagle Review, I probably spent more time there than I know. I don't have Alzheimer's, because I know I've said this about 3 times. But that, for me, probably with Professor Irv Jones, is probably always one of the most interesting dynamic, because sometimes you don't get the question in advance, right? So your mind has to be adapt at moving quickly to kind of assess and kind of address whatever the issue of the day that we may be discussing, and so that I think is probably one of my most memorable points, I would probably say.
Okay. And this Edith Thorpe has no relation to Earl Thorpe of
No, different.
no
Different
relation. Okay, no relation. So how would you, describe a typical listener on the station from your community? Who would you say a typical listener sounded like?
I think it's someone who I think, if I had to, put a composite together, I think it would be probably someone who is used to difference and diversity, used to hearing different sounds, but also most importantly, different conversations, right? That otherwise you cannot get anywhere else. And that I think, sets W90.7 apart, right? That, that jazz piece is an important facet. It is cross intergenerational now, cross racial divides now, where there's a listening audience that is there. And let me just tell you something, for those who might assume that not all, and it's true, not all younger African Americans have been listeners of jazz. But you know that it is there if you turn it on. So when I do lots of visits around the campus, I'll point up, I'll say, hey, by the way, you all know we have a radio station. I said, well, how many of you all have listened to our radio station? And invariably you'll have maybe about half. Oh, I've heard about it, I've seen it, I know some of it, So I think that that part is a kind of interesting part of understanding the role that it plays in our community, and how through the years it has become now that kind of stable place where people know that you can get not just a mixture of music, but sometimes a great conversation that is transmitted and taking place there that otherwise you would not get anywhere else. And I think that is just, but also you're training the next, and that's the part I love, you're training the next generation that will come and follow after those who are there today. And that you cannot pay for, because if they've not been exposed to what it is to be on a historic black college campus, if they've never seen a professional present themselves, right, and how to talk and how to pull out the answers. Sometimes when you're trying to ask a question and someone's being evasive sometimes, and sometimes people just don't want to tell you what they want to know, and you have to find a way to kind of tune in on that and ask that right question. Sometimes you listen and get the answer you need to get, right? And so the radio is like, sometimes most of these are recorded, right? So there's an opportunity for editing, and then sometimes every now and then you come across a live show, right? And you can't play around a live show. You got to have it together. So this is one thing I learned, untrained in radio. Like for instance, we had a conversation around Juneteenth, and so I said, okay, well, years ago they taught me how to create a script. And so I learned, so I don't go on any station nowadays unless it's timed out what that conversation is going to be about. And so I learned how to create a script. And then they'll give me the time slots that we should stop and take. Sometimes there may be a ad, or they'll say, hey, well, reintroduce your show in case the audience just turning on. So I learned all that stuff myself, and now I got at least 3 different scripts that I created myself. And I'm just in history, man. That's how it works.
Yeah, the training piece is essential on campus, I can tell, both from the archives and how important it is to the work you do and to the radio station and WNCU. Why is training students and that next generation so significant at an HBCU?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, for one, I think the training of students here at Historic Black College University, like North Carolina University, I think is vital. I think it is almost an obligation that if you want the stories, and I call them the untold stories, that may not appear anywhere else, then if you don't train that next generation to be more curious about the world in which they live in, then you're setting them up for failure, because they might assume that, oh well, all the world is about me. And sometimes you have to find in this younger next generation that sometimes the world is not about you. It is about a greater sense of community, greater sense of what is happening, what is taking place in that community. And sometimes, when you're on that radio, it's like, I'm not going to lie to you, it's like sometimes like the loneliest place in the world, because you feel like you're there by yourself, But you're not by yourself, because you have, those who will be the listening ear. They're listening in on what you have to say. And the one part I think I missed the most is sometimes getting feedback from people. They may write into the station later or something like that, but I missed that part where, you can get that dynamic conversation back and forth, because that's the growth of a conversation. And I've been trained in conversations, right? From the front porch experience of my grandparents and my parents, the best conversation I ever had in my life were on the front porch. And so when I take that aspect, when you help out and volunteer with a program on the radio station, I see it very much like that front porch experience, right? Whoever passes by, people just jump in conversation, you're just out there talking, and you'd be surprised later when people will come up to you and say, I enjoyed that conversation. And that's helpful for me to know that I may have been on the right path, right, about it.
How has WNCU changed over the course of your career? Specifically, if you could also give a specific emphasis in the realm of current events and politics.
Yeah, so I think I would say, I was sort of come of age almost near graduation when these thoughts and ideas are coming about to kind of officially, I forgot to mention it, kind of officially get the station going. And so so by the time, I get my master's in 1995, I'm teaching here, as you see, it's coming of age, during this time. And that was sort of important to see, you talk about transformation, of understanding, what were its priorities then, of being, still being that community-based kind of radio station that came out of nowhere, right? That then became this fast place where people knew where they wanted to hear some different types of music. And, and we are, nation's first state-supported liberal arts institution for African Americans in the country. And so you should expect to hear all those types of music in genres, but also at the same time, again, I stick with the news piece. Again, stories that you don't get. So you remember, I think some of the historical piece points to Tavis Smiley, but he was just part of many, right? Other voices that were kind of coming through to offer that different perspective, right? And I think that was important. I think the technology that they use has no doubt had to adjust and change itself over the years, and how they present the music. But also understanding, I think they've had to understand over this time the place that they have, and how, it is not always a given that people will listen to your station, but how you keep, people enticed and induced to kind of support you is amazing. And like I said, if you get a chance to kind of ever hear when they're in the fundraising phase, you get a chance to really understand that, where they're explaining to you this need that, if we don't raise these funds, we may not be here, right? And that to me is the idea of them kind of moving that idea of them being the burden bearer themselves, to saying to the community that we are, we like to be what we can be to you, but we need you to support us when we need that support. And that never fails every time, among others, that people never have failed a radio station in terms of raising funds. And not all of them are graduates of North Carolina Central University. Not all of them are African Americans. Very diverse group of folk who are supporters, who call in, and not just for the gifts, but to know that you have a station that you can believe in, one that offers everything to you that you may want to know. That's important.
I'm realizing your professional matriculation after finishing your master's program, you said 1995,
right,
is the year that the station came on air.
Exactly.
So,
and I got plenty of calls.
So, selfishly for the project, you help us understand the institutional history and potential issues that the station would cover. If you could tell us right now, what stands out as some of the major events and the major moments, disasters, hazards, challenges? When you're in the life of your career, what really sticks out throughout that time? And I bet the station covered it.
Yeah, not I think any, like I say, any major figure, persons that have flowed through this campus. We have a wonderful licensing program, and so the university is smart enough sometimes to kind of ask them, hey, well, while you're here, hey, we have a station. Would you mind coming over and kind of sharing some of those experiences, I think. And so that helps you to know. And then sometimes the person there may not have been a professional. It could have been a student who is given opportunity to learn on the spot, what it means to interview a person and to get to what I like to call, when you interview somebody, I call it the heart of the matter, right? Anybody can talk to anybody, but when you get to the heart of the matter, you're helping to bring out more about that person's life. And I think that part is the most important part, the training ground, for this next generation, this next cadre of students who may want to go, not just mass communication, because you also know we have a TV station here at the university as well. And so to have those two mediums kind of operate in the same building, by the way, and students having a chance to see that, I think that's healthy for the students, healthy for the university as well. But over this duration of time, I think, as you mentioned, I'll get to your question, I think at every interval, you'll see the kind of the radio stations sort of haven't been there. The anniversaries of the school, that's important. Say if a leader of this institution dies and a conversation goes on, that's important, and the reporting out from the radio station of these major milestones and events in the life and history and culture of this institution over those years has been helpful. I told folk I still remember sometimes, and I'll give you a classic example, going back to music. At Christmas time, I said, not often that you can say you can turn on and hear jazz Christmas music, but yet at WNCU 90.7, you can go to that because they'll dedicate like almost a day to like Christmas music, right? And I know that's just one example, but it's about what does the station mean to you, and that's the better, deeper, and greater question. What does it mean to you? And if it means something to you, and then you'll find your ways to support it. Whenever they call, I'm on call. They say, well, hey, we got a program coming up. Let's talk about it, and would you mind coming in and helping out? And so I don't mind that. If there's an author with a book that's out, we'll bring them through. Hey, share your story. Give us a better perspective of that. And I did that from the minute I think I got my master's, and they were kind of early opening on, and they want a fresh perspective to look at history. They call, and even today they still call. So that's a good thing.
What do you wish WNCU did better?
I think if I said, I don't know if it's better or if I would say they would do more, and that would be more of these community interest stories.
Okay.
Right. What goes on in our neighborhood? It's nice to talk about what goes on
define neighborhood though when you say that, because WNCU can reach as far as Greensboro. Do you mean regionally?
I'm talking about for us and those of us here. I mean, what is going on? Like there's an entire transformation of Durham that's going on, right? And it has changed, and I witnessed much of it. And so I think more community spots. And people ask, well, hey, and I remember the question asked, well, hey, had you ever thought about, having your spot? And hindsight, if I had the time, I probably would have, but something that invites local personalities in to tell about different stories that are moving in and out of the city. Like gentrification would be an interesting conversation because that's impacting the entire borders of this university campus. And it would be interesting to have the two perspectives of those who are moving in and those who have been anchors here, right? And I said, I wonder what that conversation would sort of be like. Or around the question of, rights and responsibilities, right, and civil rights. How do people see that? Income equality. I mean, to have those kind of dynamic conversations right there, I think would open up entire other conversations, I think, and other audiences, I think, to the station that might be needed. But also, and lastly, I would probably say in terms of that, is that trying to kind of understand more of what is it that students here today who are on this campus, because some are almost unaware that we have a radio station here, right? And so trying to find more ways to kind of find out from them through maybe some poll or something, what do they want to hear, right? Where do they go to get that music, right? And so what it means is, do you mean like maybe more student programming is important? Yeah, not just more student programming, but music that is of the desired quality that students want to listen to, which may not always be what we want to listen to. But at the end of the day, you also have to have subscribers who and supporters who pay for what goes on the station, right? But I think having the opportunity to allow some of the current students here to give you insights on what they may want to hear, that it might become this kind of increase in listenership among the students here, right? So, and I know this is not just for the students, right? But that's just an audience, that since they're here, yeah, you might want to, talk to them, right?
Is there ever a symbiosis between the work you're doing in the archive and in history courses and the radio? Do you ever encourage, in a sort of public history setting, students to act on the radio, to do work on the radio, and to present in that way?
I'll be honest. I don't think I probably have done as much around that. I think I've done a lot around helping them to find unique and interesting stories and finding ways to tell it. But you do propose and present, kind of unique opportunity because when students, I give students sometimes freedom in sort of choosing, the topics they want to talk about. We talk about it, but they get a chance to choose them. But then I give them the greatest latitude of all. I'll say, okay, so in what format will you present this to us, right? So I'm like the hearing judge, right? Oh, sorry. I'm like the judge, right? So I'll say, okay, so present your case, present your historical story to us, and I'll give them the different medium. And I don't think I probably had thought about as much around the question of how possibly the radio could possibly be one of those venues in which they could sort of present these stories. But although I do tell them, I say, well, hey, you can record yourself, right? So, and that's a positive. You can record yourself, present your presentation, send it to all your colleagues, and then we'll sit down and we'll discuss it, right? And so that may be an interesting facet to think about doing.
How do you feel about the HBCU Radio Preservation Project, and why do you think what we're doing is important here?
Well, I think it's important because I'll be honest. Before you all brought this to our attention, I don't think the consciousness level has sort of been raised around the importance of seeing how important something like this might be. Like if it's gone tomorrow, what impact would it have on us? And I don't think you kind of philosophically kind of thought through those ideas and more important understood the place of a radio station. But also it says one should not get comfortable with having a station because it is not a given all the time that a station like this will survive. And to see that we're not by ourselves, to know that I grew up also listening to Shaw University had a radio station. I knew my oldest brother graduated from Shaw University. My next to oldest brother graduated from St. Aug in Raleigh. And then my other brother graduated from Mississippi State. So interestingly, uniquely, all four institutions, and my sister came here as well. So all four of those institutions, here included, had radio stations, and that's kind of unique, right? And so again, that gives you a place and a reference point to kind of understand that. It makes you wonder. Well, I wonder what life was like there, as they had that station there too.
Yeah, because this project's not just about the living stations; it's also about the stations that have experienced a death, like Shaw's, as you mentioned.
Right.
So it's even more urgent and more, more important that we sort of get those stories when we can and preserve what remains, and hopefully revive, if possible. And I think through an understanding of the past and through history, we might get there. So we're going to move us towards the end of our conversation, but I want to give you a chance to kind of say a bit more about the power of radio as a medium for communicating history, of communicating stories. Maybe give us a vision towards the future as well, and think about what would you like to see more of? Not just the public affairs angle. I get that, but what do you want to see more of in terms of the communication of music, arts, and storytelling on campus here?
Mm-hmm. I think what would be well appreciated would be the idea of the radio station, W90.7, as an important integral part of this campus, right? And that there are those who are here in various departments that maybe have an avenue to kind of go on the radio station and kind of help share these stories, because those, for instance, those in public health, you can imagine, how you could transform this place. Durham used to be called a city of medicine, right? And I said, well, wouldn't it be interesting to think about not just public health, but our nursing program here, how interesting that would be, that those who had a call-in show and want to ask questions about something, how that could be solving a community need that exists there. That's important. But also, the historical part, which is where I come from. There are always people curious about the history of not just this university, but also the local community and Durham at large, right? And to have a place where you can have greater and deeper conversations where there are some who want to silence, for instance, some of this history and not talk about the painful parts of this history. And you think about how a radio station, when you go and look at the impact, what we call like a ripple on the pond, right? You're not just talking about local, but you're also talking about that ripple kind of going out and then that listenership picking up and people talking about it. And so that's something I think could widely be appreciated, but also could in turn probably come back and aid and support the radio by creating new and more listeners, right? And they're not, this radio station is not in a vacuum by itself. You have, the UNC has one right a few blocks away from here, a few miles away from here. And so with that, you learn that there's a difference that has to take place, right? But also that the station has to adapt as well to some of these changes that are occurring, and not assume that you in a blind's eye that we're going to always be here. And I think that's the point I mentioned earlier about it is not always a given that people will turn to you when they need a certain genre or form of music, right? It is not always given. And so I think they are like us, that you get up every morning with a desire to help tell a different and unique story, something that, as we talk about, anchors or root people to that station, and that's kind of important, but it's not easy, and I don't presume to say that I have all the answers to it, but I think it is about being an all-encompassing station that tries its best to speak to the needs of all the citizens, not just locally, but in this local environment, and that could have a regional impact, and that for me is the aspirational point, that that not just being settled where and situated and satisfied with where you are, but to think about how regionally important you might be or you could be, given all the facets of life here. We got, thank goodness, Jonah, and then luckily these stories go online, live online, and so you can go and hear some of them as well. That's important. So these stories don't just kind of go away because you have one program one day. There's a landing page where you can kind of go and hear all this. That's important, right? So when people have curious questions, they say, well, let me go hear that story. You can refer to some of those stories, and you can, and you're educating the public about where they are.
Is there anything that was not mentioned in this interview that you would want to add before we close?
No, I would just say that, like I said, we stand appreciative of the opportunity, I think, to be the place where a station like W90.7 is located. And as we like to say, in the heart of our community, a needed institution, a necessary institution, and we thank folk who had the vision to bring it forward, and that matters. I think that it didn't just show up. It wasn't just something that people just thought about. That people fought for the opportunity to be able to kind of tell the story. And you go back and look at the early history. Again, not guaranteed that we will even be where we are today. And thank goodness there's an investment in the station today to make sure it, along with our television station, are important facets of life here, training grounds for our students, but yet necessary. Going forward for the next generation of students who want to go into mass comm, who may want to, have that listener's ear for the stories that are out there.
Well, I want to thank you, Professor Vann. You've been a mentor of mine when I was here, so it's really cool to do an interview with you now on the other end. So yeah,
I think that's just as cool as ever as well. Cool. That you have that.
Yeah. Thanks for your time, Professor Vann.
Thank you.
It's a valuable contribution to our project.
We appreciate it.